Hello dolls and welcome back to another video. Welcome to the first ever video of 2025. I hope all of you had the best start to the new year, and I also hope you had the most beautiful holidays, whether you're celebrated or not. I want to start the year by doing something I have never done before on this channel. I usually talk about the fashion, the people, and the music of the 1960s and 70s, but today I want to talk about a place that was so crucial to forming these decades, a place that set off the careers of many iconic 1960s and 70s fans, and a place that I knew about only in myths and legends from reading different biographies. Today we're going to talk about the most legendary Sunset Strip nightclub. Welcome to the Whisky A Go-Go. In 2000, Vanity Fair portrayed the man behind the Whisky A Go-Go, Elmer Valentine, and they opened their article with the following words. Mick Jagger and Steve McQueen held courts from its tufted red booths. Beautiful girls frolicked in cages above its dance floor, the most famous club in rock history. The Whisky A Go-Go on the Sunset Strip launched a generation of music from the Byrds and Buffalo Springfield to Frank Zappa and the Doors. The Whisky A Go-Go. The name resonates with the raw energy of rock and roll, the glamour of Hollywood, and the rebellious spirit of generations. More than just a nightclub, the Whisky has been a cultural epicenter, a crucible where music history was forged amidst a backdrop of celebrity intrigue. Underworld connections, and a social upheaval. While its story spans decades, the 1960s and 70s stand out as a particularly potent era. A time when the Whisky not only defined the Sunset Strip, but also helped shape the very sound of a generation. The Whisky's origin story is inextricably linked to its founder Elmer Valentine, a man whose life was as colorful and complex as the club he would create. Born in Chicago, he served in the Air Force during World War II, before returning to the Windy City, where he joined the police force. However, he also lived somewhat of a double life, as he would later reveal to Vanity Fair. In quotes, I used to moonlight running nightclubs for the outfit, for gangsters. This shady side business eventually caught up with him, leading to extortion charges. Though the charges didn't stick, Chicago became too hot for Elmer, so he headed westwards to LA. After arriving in 1960, he quickly put his nightclub experience to use, opening a club called PJ's, a venue that gained traction when up-and-coming singer-songwriter Trini Lopez recorded a live album there, achieving commercial success. This solidified Valentine's belief in the nightclub business, but he remained uncertain about Los Angeles. In 1963, he sold his share of PJ's and embarked on a European tour in search of inspiration. In Paris, he stumbled upon a packed discotheque going by the name Whisky A Go-Go. This experience ignited a vision to replicate that same vibrant energy over in the States. I tried my hardest to find out anything about the legendary business that was the Whisky A Go-Go in Paris, but it is so hard because there's almost nothing there, and when you go and search for the Whisky A Go-Go online, you only get directed to the LA location. However, I found out a couple of things. One thing was that the French bar was named after a British comedy film from the late 1940s called Whisky Galore. I've seen a couple of people suggesting that the Parisian Whisky was actually the place where go-go dancing originated, thus making for the name Whisky A Go-Go. Apparently Elmer Valentine had to pay a small sum to license the name, but with the name Whisky A Go-Go and the vibrant disco feeling in store, he went back to the US to create his own club. Returning to Los Angeles, he found the Sunset Strip a far cry from its golden days. In the early 1960s, the Sunset Strip was a district in transition, caught between the remnants of its golden age Hollywood glamour and the budgeting youth culture that would soon define it. While classic establishments that once catered to movie stars still existed, they were no longer the exclusive domain of the Hollywood elite, and the Strip had generally lost some of its former shine. However, a young crowd was beginning to emerge, drawn to the area by a desire for freedom and the growing influence of rock and roll music, which was starting to be featured in some clubs. This created a sense of anticipation, a feeling that something was about to happen. While established venues like the Zeros and the Macabo still operated with shifting clientele, Gazzari's was definitely the key player, featuring live music that attracted a younger demographic. It was where Johnny Rivers performed before before going over to the Whisky. Crucially, no single venue dominated the Strip at this time. The Strip was a collection of establishments with a mix of patrons waiting for a unifying force. The opening of the Whisky A Go-Go in 1964 provided that spark, bringing a new energy, a focus on rock and roll, and a distinct identity that would transform the Sunset Strip to the legendary hub of rock counterculture in the 1960s. It is safe to say that Elmer Valentine was a key figure in restoring the Sunset Strip to its former glory, and ironically he did so by completely changing everything about it. It seemed like the new glory was different, way less glamorous, and fueled by the new music that would soon define the 1960s. While on the lookout for a venue that would house the legendary Whisky A Go-Go, Elmer Valentine ended up buying out a struggling club called The Party, where he would soon establish his own Whisky A Go-Go. The Whisky officially opened its doors in 1964, but Elmer knew he needed a compelling act to draw in the crowd. He found it in Johnny Rivers, a talented singer-songwriter who was performing at the nearby Gazaris. Johnny Rivers' energetic performances and growing fan base immediately captivated Elmer. Johnny was exactly what he needed to make the Whisky a success. With the encouragement of record producer Lou Adler, yes, the Lou Adler who produced some records for the Mamas and the Papas, as well as the Rocky Horror Picture Show, Elmer offered Johnny Rivers a residency at the Whisky. This proved to be a masterstroke, drawing in crowds and establishing the Whisky as the epicenter of the Sunset Strip scene. Within its first year, the Whisky garnered national attention, becoming a magnet for Tinseltown royalty. Johnny Rivers himself would later recall in quotes, "Everybody was there. I mean, you'd look up and there was Cary Grant dancing." The Whisky's appeal transcended American celebrities too. When the Beatles embarked on their first journey to the United States, they made time to visit the club, further cementing its legendary status. The Whisky quickly earned a reputation of a place where inhibitions were shed with numerous racy stories. The Whisky quickly earned a reputation as a place where inhibitions were shed, with numerous racy stories circulating about the Beatles, English actor James Mason, and Jane Mansfield. Only myths and legends exist about these people and their time at the club, but in good old Whisky fashion, these are just myths, forever locked into the walls and floors of the legendary Whisky. Elmer knew to keep the Whisky relevant and going, he needed to change the house band quite frequently to always catch on to the latest music craze. So in 1966, of all bands, The Doors became the house band of the Whisky. This is quite ironic actually, because band members, especially Jim Morrison and Raymond Zarek, who were both film students at UCLA, initially were pretty hesitant to embrace the Sunset Strip scene, viewing it as a haven for Hollywood swingers, as Raymond Zarek would later tell Vanity Fair. Yet the residency at the Whisky proved crucial for their rise to fame, even though Jim's increasingly erratic behavior ultimately led to their ban from the club. This only added to the Whisky's mystique as a place where anything could happen. Despite the ban, the Doors' time at the Whisky was crucial to their rise to fame. The club provided them with a platform to develop their unique sound and stage presence, and the controversy surrounding their ban only added to their mystique. The Whisky, in turn, benefited from its association with the Doors, further solidifying its reputation as a venue where groundbreaking and sometimes controversial music was showcased. In essence, the Doors' relationship with the Whisky A Go-Go was somewhat of a love and hate affair. While they initially disdained the scene, the club played a vital role in their development and rise to stardom. Even their banishment became a part of the Whisky legend, cementing its status as a place where rock history was made. The Whisky A Go-Go also inadvertently ignited one of the defining dance crazes of the 1960s, the go-go dancer. The club's compact layout provided one major problem that Elmer viewed rather as a challenge: how to provide entertainment between sets while maximizing space. See, Elmer kind of feared that during the time it would take one band to pack up and then the next band to come on, people might get bored and therefore leave the club. And his entire plan focused around the idea of keeping you inside the Whisky for as long as possible. And for this problem, he had a pretty unique and groundbreaking idea. The solution was to position a female DJ in a raised, transparent enclosure, elevated above the dance floor. Someone who wouldn't only spin records, but also a pretty face for people to look at. Elmer Valentine decided to hold castings for the part, and soon the pretty young women of Hollywood started to line up in front of the doors of the Whisky. Initially, a young woman was hired for the DJ role, but when her mother found out, she forbade it. And so Elmer turned to his cigarette girl, a beautiful woman named Patty Brockhurst. Patty, while playing records, developed a habit of dancing to the music she spun. This spontaneous expression of energy and love for music resonated with the crowd, creating a sensation. Elmer Valentine, the witty businessman he was, recognized the potential of this phenomenon. He quickly had 2 more platforms constructed and hired additional dancers. These women, dressed in fashionable miniskirts and go-go boots, became a permanent fixture at the Whisky. Their energetic, free-form dancing defying the go-go style and laying the groundwork for generations of go-go dancers to come. This accidental creation not only provided continuous entertainment within the club, but also catapulted the go-go dancer into the national spotlight, solidifying her as a cultural icon of the 1960s and further cementing the Whisky A Go-Go's indelible place in pop culture history. This spontaneous creation became synonymous with the club and the era, capturing the spirit of youthful exuberance and contributing significantly to the Whisky's allure. However, it wasn't all well at the club, and by the late 1960s, despite all his efforts to leave behind his past, Elmer Valentine's connection to organized crime resurfaced. It had started a couple years prior when the Whisky's success became known, and some of his former associates had tried to cash in on Johnny Rivers' earnings. Lou Adler even received a death threat for his involvement with the club. Elmer, however, intervened, traveling to Chicago to personally address the situation with his former associates. He also relied heavily on his connection to the notorious hitman Felix Anthony Alderizo, who was also known as Milwaukee Phil, to handle local disputes, such as the rivalry with the nearby Gazzaris after the Whisky had sort of stolen Johnny Rivers. The Whisky's arrival dramatically altered the Sunset Strip. The club's popularity drew hordes of young people, transforming the area from a haven of Hollywood's old glamour to a hub for the burgeoning hippie and counterculture scene. This influx of youth, while invigorating the Strip, also created tensions with the local businesses and law enforcement. The demolition of Pandora's Box in 1967 became a symbol for this conflict, highlighting the clash between the established order and the rise of the youth culture. In many ways, the development of the Sunset Strip in the 1960s is a metaphor for the changing world during this decade. Just like the old Hollywood era of the Sunset Strip was outdated, so was the glitz and glamour of the 1950s. With the 1960s, a new decade came. A decade where people wanted something real. This whole idea that the Sunset Strip was only there for the beautiful and rich was really overworked by the 1960s, and the youth started to take over the clubs and the entire Sunset Strip. I think it is so interesting how, with Elmer Valentine's arrival, this new era of the Sunset Strip broke loose, kind of like how with the arrival of the 1960s, people were done with the old way of living and something completely new was about to happen. Many say that the summer of 1967, the summer of love, didn't only mark the height of the hippie movement, but also was the beginning of its downfall. One of the darkest chapters of the 1960s were the Manson family murders. And before his infamy, Charles Manson was a reoccurring presence at the Whisky, his bizarre behavior unsettling even the club's tolerant atmosphere. For an interview with the New York Times in the 1980s, co-owner Mario Maglieri recounted a chilling encounter with Charles Manson, who threatened him after being asked to leave after hours, saying, in quotes, "I said, 'What are you doing here? We're closed. You can't be here.' He looked at me and says, 'I can have you killed.' And I effing grabbed him, threw him out. I should have strangled that son of a bitch." This encounter foreshadowed the tragic events that would mark the end of the decade's idealistic shimmer. By the 1970s, rock and roll had largely migrated to larger venues, and disco dominated the mainstream. The Whisky faced a period of decline, even briefly closing in 1974. However, Elmer Valentine, ever the opportunist, reopened the club in 1976, perfectly positioned to capitalize on the burgeoning punk rock and new wave scene. Bands like the Go-Go's, the Runaways, Dead Kennedys, and Blondie found a home at the Whisky, bringing their dedicated followers and transforming the Sunset Sunset Strip once again. The long-haired hippies of the 1960s were replaced by punks with mohawks and safety pins, and the Whisky was at the forefront of this new wave of rebellion. As musical trends shifted again in the 1990s, the Whisky adapted, hosting a variety of genres including grunge, alternative rock, and punk. While the massive crowds of the hair metal era may have subsided, the Whisky remained a vital part of the Sunset Strip, a place where both established and up-and-coming bands could perform. Elmer Valentine, the man who brought the Whisky A Go-Go to life, passed away on December 3rd, 2008 in Studio City, Los Angeles, at the age of 85. His legacy, however, lives on. Today, the Whisky A Go-Go continues to operate on the Sunset Strip, though its role has evolved several times since its glory days of the 1960s. While it's no longer the primary launching pad for breaking bands, it remains a legendary venue, a bucket list destination for music fans and a place where established acts often perform. It serves as a living museum of rock and roll history, a reminder of the countless iconic moments that have taken place within its walls. Even though the Whisky's head-banging, hard-rocking, and tail-shaking heyday may be in the past, Mike Marglieri Jr., the second-generation club owner, told KPCC-FM the club still holds a unique appeal. With a good band, a lively crowd, and a bit of imagination, it's still possible to feel transported back to the Whisky in the 1960s and 70s, a place where decorum took a backseat to the raw energy of rock and roll. The Whisky A Go-Go story during the 60s and 70s is more than just a chronicle of a nightclub. It's a powerful reflection of a rapidly changing America. These 2 decades witnessed some of the biggest changes of the 20th century, and the Whisky was often at the epicenter of these transformations. The club witnessed the birth of rock legends, providing a crucial platform for bands like The Doors to honor their sound and connect with a growing audience hungry for something new and authentic. It became a haven for the rise of countercultures, providing a space where hippies, rebels, and free thinkers could gather, express themselves, and challenge the status quo. The shift from the psychedelic idealism of the late 1960s to the raw, rebellious energy of punk rock in the mid-1970s is also vividly reflected within the Whisky's walls. This transition wasn't just about challenging musical styles. It represented a deeper societal shift, a disillusionment with the promises of the previous decade, and a growing sense of frustration and anger. The Whisky's impact extended far beyond the music it showcased. It became a symbol of youth rebellion, a place where boundaries were pushed, both musically and socially. The go-go dancers, initially an accidental creation, became a cultural phenomenon, embodying the spirit of sexual liberation and free expression that defined much of the 1960s. The club's connection to both celebrity glamour and the darker undercurrents of the era, from its brushes with organized crime to the unsettling presence of figures like Charles Manson, further underscored its complex role in American culture. The Whisky wasn't just a passive observer of the changes, it was an active participant, a catalyst that helped shape the cultural landscape. The Whisky's enduring legacy rests not solely on the famous names that graced its stage, but on its roles as a cultural touchstone. It was a place where music, rebellion, and social change intertwined, creating a unique and powerful atmosphere. While the club continued to evolve in the decades that followed, embracing new musical trends and maintaining its presence on the Sunset Strip, the 60s and 70s remain its defining era. It was during these years that the Whisky truly became a legend, a symbol of a time when rock and roll was more than just music. It was a force for change, a voice of a generation, and the Whisky A Go-Go was its loudest and most vibrant amplifier. The echoes of those unforgettable nights continue to resonate within its walls, a testament to the enduring power of music and its ability to shape our world. So that is it for today's video. That is it for the legendary Whisky A Go-Go. I would love to know what you think about this. Would you like me to feature more places? Is there anything you would like to add? I really enjoyed learning about the Whisky. I had read so much about it in so many biographies, but really taking the time to research all the history and everything was so interesting, and I feel like it helps you understand so much about America and the rock scene in the mid to late 1960s. Before I leave, I have to ask you, I never know whether I like it like this or whether I like it buttoned more. I think I did like the almost closed but not fully buttoned for this for the majority of the video, but I honestly really adore this little set. I feel like this is such a great look. I would have probably worn to the Whisky a Go-Go back in its heydays. So that is it for today's video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I would love you to give it a thumbs up and maybe even share it with a friend. It supports me, it supports the channel, and it would truly mean the world. I hope you have a beautiful day. Go out, enjoy the sunshine. Take yourself some time to focus on you and your mental health today, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye, dolls!